Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm just going to continue to admit people from the waiting room for a second. Fabulous. I'll kick off with a little introduction. Welcome to Avid Reader Online. Thank you for joining us on Zoom tonight for a discussion of Tank Water by Michael Burge. It's such a shame that we can't be together in person tonight. We were kind of holding out hope that Michael would be able to travel as he lives on a border community, but luckily we're still able to catch up over Zoom. Before we jump into things, I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently on in Meanjin, Brisbane, the Yuggera and Turrbal people, as well as the traditional owners of the lands from which you're all joining us from across the country via Zoom. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. For our audience tonight, you will be muted for the session, but should you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box and I'll answer them. You're welcome to leave your video on if you'd like. And then in the top right-hand corner where it says view, just make sure you're set to speaker view. That way you'll be able to see the speakers in full screen. And then I'm about to send you through a link where you can purchase your copy of Tank Water into the chat box. And then this will show you, it should pop up with a little notification, which will show you how to access the chat box function, which will be very important for our Q&A session that we'll host towards the end. Please feel free to type in your questions throughout the event, and then I'll pass them along to Michael towards the end. Next, I would love to introduce you to our conversation partner for tonight, Dominique Schwartz. Dom is a multi-platform journalist and former ABC foreign correspondent, currently working in communications with the independent think tank, the Regional Australia Institute. With family roots in South Australia's Barossa Valley, Dom grew up with a love of the countryside and its people, and throughout her career has gravitated towards telling their stories and investigating the issues that affect them, whether here in Australia or overseas in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, or the high Arctic. Over to you, Dom.
Thanks very much, Jana, and great to see you all here this evening. I'm really delighted to be able to be hosting this conversation. And like Jana, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet. And in my case, like Jana, especially the Turrbal and Yuggera people. And I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us this evening. Well, yes, I'm delighted to be here to discuss and celebrate the birthing of this wonderful novel, Tank Water by Michael Burge. It took him 12 years, so we're very glad it made it out into the world. And for those of you who might have already read it and are fans, don't worry, the next one is already in the pipeline. So that's good to know. A little bit about Michael. He's an Australian author and journalist who lives at Deepwater in the New England region of New South Wales with his husband and their dogs. After graduating from the National Institute of Dramatic Art, Michael undertook media studies in the United Kingdom. His non-fiction debut, Questionable Deeds, Making a Stand for Equal Love, lifted the lid on familial and institutional homophobia in Australia during the marriage equality campaign. Michael has written, edited, directed and broadcast for Fairfax Media, Intermedia, United News and Media, Margot Kingston's No Fibs and a range of lifestyle mastheads. He's the director of the annual High Country Writers Festival in Glen Innes, and Tank Water is his first novel. Now, for those who may not have read the novel or know too much about it, I thought we could start first off with a little bit of what's on the back cover, and then Michael will get to you. So this is how the book is sold. James Brandt didn't look back when he got away from his rural hometown as a teenager. Now he's returned to Kippen for the first time in 20 years because his cousin Tony has been found dead under the local bridge. The news that Tony has left him the entire family farm triggers James' journalistic curiosity and his anxiety, both of which cropped up during his turbulent journey to adulthood. But it is the unexpected homophobic attack he survives that draws James into a hunt for the reasons one lonely Kippen farm boy in every generation kills himself. Standing in the way, it's James's father, the town's recently retired top cop. He's not prepared to investigate crimes no one reckons have taken place. James must use every newshound's trick he ever learned in order to uncover the brutal truth. So welcome, Michael. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Dom. What a wrap. That's amazing. It's really wonderful. I can see friends and family on the screen. I can see people who were involved in the putting together of Tank Water, and I'm so thrilled to have you all join me and us here tonight. It's really wonderful, and I'm very moved. I'm joining you from the Jarrabal country, which is a small geographic territory between a big one, Kamilaroi country, and Bundjalung country down on the coast near Coffs Harbour, 1,000 metres above sea level. And don't we know it at the moment? It's a bit cold. I think the fire's on tonight. So thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Well, look, Tank Water is described on the book as a coming of age story and a crime thriller. But is that the sort of book that you first intended to write?
Gosh, yes, it's a big question for authors about genre. It becomes very important when you put a book together to know where it will sit on the shelf, because everyone wants to know where they can, booksellers want to know where that will be in the bookshop. But no, I didn't set out to write a crime novel. I really love the crime genre. I grew up on, the crime greats like Agatha Christie particularly. I used to collect her books, fantastic. And I dip into them now and again. If I, just want a lazy reread, I'll read an Agatha Christie. I think these days we'd call them like cozy mysteries. Agatha Christie is very familiar. But no, I didn't set out to write in the crime field, but eventually I had no choice because, of course, one of the major themes in the novel is, of course, gay hate crimes. And there's no getting away from the fact that we're observing a resurgence of attention, or perhaps not a resurgence, perhaps for the first time we're seeing due attention paid to these crimes. And they've traditionally been kind of a bit sort of swept under the carpet or sort of kept out of the major headlines. But I think most of us now pay attention to the media. We're at the end of around 10 years of reporting. And it became apparent to me towards the end of that long writing process, what I could achieve by bringing that theme into a story, which perhaps before that would have been described really as a rural family saga, for want of a better term. But yeah, that's how it came to be a crime novel.
Well, that certainly pepped up the rural family saga, didn't it? Then?
It did. It did.
Certainly gave it a bit of oomph.
Yeah.
Well, the central character is James Brandt. Now, we first meet him in 2005. He's a journalist who's happily ensconced in a relationship with his long-term partner, Dylan. But we learn fairly soon that, he was someone who actually couldn't wait to get away from the sexual claustrophobia of Kippen and the events of 1985. Now, people talk about debut novels as being autobiographical. You might be able to get let off the hook because you have indeed written a memoir already.
Yeah.
But I am wondering, how much does James's experiences mirror your own?
I think you're right. A lot of debut novels are very close to the author's life. They say write what you know. And I think that's very good advice because you already have a shorthand into the settings and the emotional journey of your characters. But Tank Water it's a bit like a Frankenstein manuscript. I drew on various things in order to put it together. And as I said, the gay hate element really came very late in the piece and really gave it the oomph that the whole story needed. But I've been trying to find a way to write about the place where I came from for really all my life. I remember at the penultimate moment of being about to start my HSC back in 1987, I'd studied so much, I was really sick of the study, and I actually started to write this novel then, which is more than 3 decades ago. But I didn't have the emotional maturity to be objective enough about it. I was deeply closeted at the time, and it was the peak of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and there was a lot of fear associated with being gay, and therefore that really contributed to me being closeted. So I dipped in and out of the attempts to write this for many, many years, but it certainly wasn't until, well, at least another 20 years after that, that I found the headspace to write objectively about my own origins in the country, and to kind of get to grips with how to portray that in a way which is not just a rip-off of real life. So yes, I am similar to James, but I think I've been in a kind of a life imitating art cycle, because I moved back to the country, not quite to where I was from, but certainly to the region 4 years ago. And it doesn't, in hindsight, it doesn't seem like any mistake that suddenly the reality of country life actually started to seed through the novel. And certainly those were also the years when the case of Scott Johnson's death at Manly in 1988. So in 2018, that was really hitting the news cycle. So I had a lot of stuff to draw on, but I had to do a lot of research to find the cases that took place in the country. And there are quite a few of them. Anecdotally, there are lots of them. They just don't get written up in the same way that those high profile cases in the country do. So it was my own story kind of meeting reality. And being a journalist, as you know, we're trained to keep ourselves out of the story, although that has changed over the years. But I saw an opportunity to really dovetail a whole series of things together. There are some family stories that people that know my family and that are in my family will recognize, particularly about the upbringing, life on the farm, life for a family who's left the farm, and some of them come back for different things, as we always did as we were kids, coming back for funerals and weddings and birthday celebrations. And so this idea of being slightly disconnected and brought back in, some of those scenes are very close to the truth, but some of the verbal formative homophobia that James is exposed to, they are almost verbatim for situations that I remember being in as a child. And or as a teenager, these weren't menacing, but they were certainly, they certainly contributed to this idea that being gay was just not going to be great news.
And so you've now come back to the country, as you say, almost like full circle. And I'm interested to know, do you feel that things have changed? Would it be different? Were you a teenager growing up now in a country town in the area in which you live?
Yes, most certainly. There's exponential change happening for LGBTIQA+ in the country. There's no mistake. It's really because we've achieved the broadest equality that we have to date. There's still a very long way to go. There's some pressing issues to cover off on. But certainly the marriage equality public vote approach, as difficult as it was, and as much as many of us disagreed with it, myself included, because it told us exactly what we already know. And that is that the vast majority of Australians for a very long time have supported our access to the Marriage Act. But that approach had some benefits in hindsight. It really asked communities across the country to get to grips with what I'd call LGBTIQA+ dignity. It wasn't just about marriage, it was about our dignity, and there's residual ramifications that are positive in that sense. So it's been really wonderful to see the difference that it makes. Richard and I have felt that because we're out and we have a good dose of gay pride that has come from those equalities that we fought for and marched for and knocked on doors for. We have actually witnessed on a few occasions the positive effect that has just by being at an afternoon tea in the country. And families who, when I was a teenager, would never have spoken about their family members who were possibly not straight, but now they do. And they do it with a sense of safety and pride, which is really wonderful to witness in the fullness of time. Yes, it's incredibly different now. And as I said, there is more to change, but we will, and we are getting onto that.
And I mean, just in terms of that sort of that coming out, I mean, we've got in the story, James is obviously very comfortable in his city life with being a gay man, but there's still, you can just feel it, the closer he gets to his hometown, the harder all that becomes again. And it's still, you know, it's still not something that is spoken about with some of his closest relatives. So there's still that, and I think that works wonderfully in terms of the tension that goes through the story. And then obviously as the plot develops and we find out more things. I suppose, you know, do you think that the novel in that way can still talk to people who are maybe dealing with those issues, or show that although maybe attitudes have changed, there's a whole lot of things that people have to deal with in terms of coming to terms with their sexuality and having it out there in a family, which has all the sort of backstories that all families do have and all of the things that come with that?
I think so, absolutely. And I have a really recent example to answer that question with, which I'm very pleased to have. So I wrote a piece for Guardian Australia that was published in the last weekend about rural gay hate crimes and the issues that are faced by young gay people in the country and their families. And I was talking to Shane Mallard, the New South Wales MLC politician, and it was his view that when, in his experience, and he's not from the country, but his parents moved into the country in the Dubbo area, I believe. It's his belief, and I tend to agree with him, that now when you're out and you're young in the country, you are safer. You're not more safe staying in the closet. You are actually safer if you're out, because you have people looking out for you. And you have people who are more willing to have conversations with you and about you in an accepting way, as opposed to it all being secret and away and not spoken of. These issues are solved so much better by people talking about them, telling their stories, seeing it much more in the media and in popular culture, which we're starting to do. So, you know, I don't think you can watch an Australian-made TV drama now or comedy without the inclusion of LGBTIQA+. There's probably more space for that, more inclusion to come, and in literature as well. But the more visibility there is, the better, on a personal level and also a collective level, for sure. And I think, yes, if Tank Water can actually spark those conversations, because I think readers are reminded every second chapter that it's the past, even 2005, it's still 16 years ago. So, you know, those were the sort of bad old days. And I wrote about that era in my memoir that was set in 2004, 2005. So look how quickly things have changed when you think about it in that short time scale. So
yeah, it's amazing. It really is. It's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just in terms of your book, and we were talking earlier about particular passages that that you like. You've chosen one which is a bit of a favourite of yours. I wonder if you could read it for us and tell us why it is that that it holds a special place for you.
I will. This, at the beginning, Dominique read out the blurb, and the blurb on the back cover refers to an unexpected homophobic attack that James survives. So these 2 pages that I'm going to read, the morning after that, just to set the scene a little bit. And he's found himself, actually, he's woken up in his deceased cousin's flat after a night of pretty acute fear. The sense of isolation was immediate as James struck out along the narrow footpath that traversed the Kippen bridge. It was so high there was nothing above it but air, and the turbulence of a passing truck made him grasp the handrail. He forced himself to stop at the middle of the span. From here, one ute and the toilet block were dwarfed by the panoramic view of the brownish water receding in a gracious curve, wrapping around Kippen and meandering through stands of poplars and willows and into endless farmlands. Directly below, bare trees rose up towards him, yet even they were out of reach. Last night's escape became clear. The concrete path snaked away into the high grass before meeting the weir. Various little trails ran up the scrubby slope to the supermarket car park. If that way had been blocked for Tony by a bunch of kids intent on belting him with something, the only way home would have been back up the road and across this bridge, picking off poofters in the park. James went across the road, almost not seeing the car approaching from town. As its driver sounded the horn, he backed against the gutter and gave an apologetic wave. The view from the other side of the road bridge was wilder. Here, the crumbling timbers of the railway viaduct blocked out most of the forested riverbanks below, leaving a gap just a few metres wide between both bridges. The old station showed back towards the main street, screened by saplings that had pushed up through the rails and sleepers. More trees were growing further down, right against the massive struts that held up the track. Directly below, James spied the reed bed where Tony had been found. It would take an immense amount of courage to leap voluntarily, but if you jumped out of fear in the dark, perhaps while being pursued, that would be a different matter. If you were thrown into the darkness and no passing vehicle was there to notice, you'd simply disappear. James churned the possibilities over all the way back to the motel car park, trying for the outward confident air of someone returning from a brisk morning walk. His unnecessary show was rather undone when he was momentarily confused by having two sets of keys. Inside, he tore off his muddy shoes and ignored signs of his takeaway dinner and strangled the shower into life. Catching himself naked in the mirror, James gave a laugh that was more like a snort. He and Dylan should get back to the gym, but they only ever talked about it. Before long, one of them would renege and the other would follow. Once he was dry, he checked his phone for calls from his father in case he'd missed one under the noise of the water, but there was nothing. Of his desperate escape from the night before, there was little trace, just a hairline scratch on his neck, probably from a branch, and the red patches of the stinging nettles above the line of his socks. His muddy jeans and shoes were swapped for the casual suit he'd packed for Tony's funeral. He also deleted the desperate text he'd sent himself. When he went to pay, James noticed the sign, "Breakfast not served," laminated, covered in dust, bending up from the cash register. He rang the dull buzzer, put together from some kind of old doorbell. It sounded in the distance through a glass sliding door with an orange lace curtain. He could smell frying eggs. A morning television show blared from the room beyond. The teenager who greeted him was more intent on the television than taking his money. "Enjoy your stay?" she said, halfway through the curtain, laughing at the interview. "It was crap," James said, low and facetious. "That's nice. Visit us again, won't you?" she said, impatiently pulling the receipt and putting it down on the bench before sliding the door shut with a slap.
Love it. It's great. And it certainly pays when you've when the person who's written it has also studied at NIDA, don't you think? Give you full marks. So tell us what it is about that particular passage, Michael, which made you decide to read that one.
I think, look, it's 2 pages long and it stretches from the worst imaginable experience for a gay man, I think, right through to a moment where he's able to turn it on its head and grab a bit of humour out of the situation that he's in. And I think probably I've been like that for most of my life. Just sort of laughing in the face of tragedy. You've got to keep going. I've never experienced the kind of hate crimes in this book. I certainly, after researching it, I realised how close I had come on occasion. I think a lot of gay men my age, the more we read about it, the more we realise that there are patterns of behaviour around baiting gay men that do certainly tell you over time that you're a target, let's put it that way. So those 2 pages are about a man who has realised that he is a target and that somebody else close to him, his cousin, most probably was. And you know what, that's kind of as close as you get to the truth when you read about gay hate crimes, real ones that have happened. They're so, the word I use is gaslight. They hang in the gaslight. Just when you feel you've got a handle on them, something comes along that makes you think, no, I'm being ridiculous. And a lot of the researchers talk about this phenomenon. It's so difficult to discern the historical gay hate crimes. And we're still yet to see a turning point about that in this country. So yeah, I chose that, I guess, because I didn't realize it until I reread it, that I've encapsulated that moment for James. Just walking across it. He's simply walking across a bridge in a country town. That's what everyone else sees, but there's a lot more going on at that place.
A lot of deep water, and water's is a theme, isn't it, through the book? Which I think is wonderful. You have the tank water, you have the water of the river, and then of course later in the book Tony has a yacht, so there's that watery connection there as well. So I think that works very well. Was that something that you wanted to weave through the book?
You know what, I really hope that Liz is on the line here tonight. She said that she might be able to join us from London. Liz is an editor and an author and a writer and an all-round wordsmith wonder. And it was Liz, Elizabeth Ferretti is her name, and she runs a writing program called Writer Revealed. And I cannot sing Liz's praises enough. It was Liz who picked the motif of water from a draft, maybe halfway through the drafting process, and said, draw it out. It's, you know, as I write, one of the struggles I have as a writer in general is to actually write emotion. And it's, yes, I think it's kind of a residual thing about the closet, where closeting is just, we talk about this idea of being an inside a wardrobe, but you are totally exposed when you're closeted, but you shut down. You do everything you can to get people off the scent of the truth. It's, I think, why a lot of this is generalizing. Closeting is the experience is very different for everyone who experiences it, but there is some commonality, and this idea of coming across as completely asexual and is a thing that does happen for a lot of us. And so writing about emotion, I think I really had to, that's where I learned the most about writing, by writing Tank Water, was remembering to actually allow the reader into how it feels in certain moments. And Liz certainly assisted me with that. And it was, in this particular book, inextricably linked with water. So it's a major motif that binds the eras of this story together and the different settings. It's a major theme, and it's something which, yes, writers, we need themes and motifs to hang stuff on. So water was a perfect one for this story.
And I think the other thing that's displayed in that particular extract that you read, but you could have pulled any of them out because it's throughout the book. The thing that I noticed was, and I find it interesting that you said it was hard, that you had to really work to write about emotion, because to me, I get that in the way that you write. It doesn't feel like it's been a hard task. It seems to come naturally, but it's also, I think what I like about it is that and probably it's to do with my journalistic training like yours, I like the clean sentences, you know, they're strong. they don't, waffle on forever and a day, although I do quite like a few waffle on kind of books as well. But I think it's your words are well chosen and sparse, and there's always that edge of humor there somewhere. It's not too far away. But I'm interested in exploring with you. I mean, obviously, rural fiction has become sort of a darling, or hasn't it, of the bookstores.
Yes,
people love that. And really, the times are just made for it. I mean, I work at the Regional Australia Institute, and a lot of our work is about this whole movement of people to the regions. A lot of people in capital cities, it seems, have just discovered that, you can live out there and it's great. Yeah. But interestingly, a lot of people who live in the regions now aren't going to the cities for obvious reasons, one would think. So if you like, it's sort of the regions and rural living and life has become very popular. And now, of course, we have Outback Noir, which you've happily slotted yourself into, which is great. But the other thing you do in your book is, and I'm interested because you say, you wanted to write about New England. It's a wonderful place. It's terrific. It's gorgeous. And yet, the central theme is a gay hate crime. And when you write about the place, it's not written romantically You're not talking about, towering cliffs and beautiful babbling brooks and all the rest of it. And if you take that particular segment that you read there, you talk about the scrubby grasses and the murky water and whatever. Do you think that people now are they can see past that whole sort of thing of, everything has to be beautiful and gorgeous, or is that something that you don't even think about? You're just trying to write it as it is?
That's such a great question for a writer who's also a journalist, because I actually think that I've improved as a journalist after writing fiction. I've found a shorthand to actually write emotion in journalistic lingo, if you like. But your question was about the setting. I think there's been some really pivotal examples of great writers in the last 20 to 30 years who have broken the territory there. The one who is a standout is Annie Proulx, the American writer of Brokeback Mountain, The Shipping News, Accordion Crimes, and fantastic short stories. I think that her legacy will go on and on. I know that it flows through me. I love her work, but what I really love about it is the efficiency. I don't believe that Annie Proulx started out as a journalist, but when she writes journalism, she has that same style, and it's just this. She doesn't waste words. Is the only way I can describe it. And words are wonderful. Being efficient with them isn't necessarily always the way, as you quite rightly said. Some writers. I recently read the opening, because I'm writing historical fiction at the moment. I'm reading a fair bit of it, and sometimes I sit down and I read the opening sections of books just to see how they entered that story. And a couple of times I've read examples, I won't name them. These are great works and they're very acclaimed. But I remember reading one in particular, the first page, if I was writing that, the page was a wonderful story about somebody waking up. And it went into the wonderful depths of the possibilities of the experience of simply waking up. But I know, had I written that, I simply would have written, he woke up. Yeah. and yet they both of those options are great. One celebrates words and gives the reader a totally different experience. The other moves very quickly. And if there's one thing I did as a writer, that was to study the way to make a great plot. And I literally have practiced it so much that I can't write any other way. I get bored if I don't write with a strong plot. A lot of writers do this very, very differently, I hasten to add, and there's no right or wrong way to do it.
So do you work out your plot in a very detailed fashion before you actually get into writing?
Most of it. I'm actually working on something at the moment, not the one that's nearly finished, but I'm writing the first draft of something where it's the very first time I've plotted something out the whole way through. It's semi-based on real life story. And I'm so grateful because I'm so busy at the moment, but I even through the busiest periods of my life, through full-time work, I still maintain my writing regime of new work. And I tell you, it's great when you know where you're going and you're busy. At times, I've also written through times when I've had part-time work or just casual work, and so there's more time to write. Those are the times when I can get away with plotting less, but I do generally plot most of the story. There's a point in all storytelling, which is often called the point of no return. And the example I give of that to writing students and other writers when I talk about the process is from Star Wars. It's the moment when Luke Skywalker works out that Darth Vader is his father. There's nothing the same in the entire universe for that story cycle after that moment, that change of everything. And I think when I find that moment in a plot, nothing can stop me from writing that manuscript, whether it's a short story, whether it's sometimes even a long form article. If I find that point of no return, it's telling me why I'm writing that. And it fills the tank of fuel. And I just literally drive through that story relentlessly until it's done. It gives me the passion to do it, and hopefully it gives the reader that classic roller coaster arc of a story. That's what it's
The
designed.
Darth Vader moment. I could just see it now. All of us budding writers will go out and get our little sort of lightsabers and running around the room waving them for inspiration.
Yes.
And so for you, when did that point of no return happen for Tank Water?
Oh, that's a good question. When does everything become so different in Tank Water that the world changes? I think there's probably a couple of them. There's one in the 1985 storyline, and there's one in the 2005 storyline. And I think it probably would be impossible to describe them without giving away terrible spoilers. As I think about what they are, I don't know if I can even talk about it euphemistically, because I don't want to ruin the experience, because you don't know at the start of Star Wars that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. So, but they're certainly there. I can think of both of them. I actually remember the moment when I do a lot of lap swimming, and when I swim laps, I get so bored that my mind wanders into stories. And I remember the point of no return in the 1985 storyline of Tank Water, when James is a teenager. I remember the moment, I remember the stroke I was doing backstroke, when I thought of what could happen, and it drove the rest of that story. And because it was my first experience of writing a long form piece, I hadn't plotted, but I certainly remember the positive benefits of finding that moment in order to drive that manuscript to completion. I don't know
how interesting that you did it while you were in water.
Yes, well, there you go. There you go. Yeah, well said.
And do you find, and I suppose just in terms of when you had that aha moment, that point of no return, how far along the process was it in terms of writing Tank Water?
It was, if we talk about it being a 12-year journey from idea to book in hand, this was probably before the halfway point. Yeah, it was, yes, a long way before the theme of gay hate crime came along. The story was very much a gay themed story at that point, but this idea of the gay hate crime theme, yes, was a long way after that. Yes, but it was something, those of you who've read it, it's what James decides to do at that pivotal moment, about 2/3 of the way through the story, and it creates a bit of a mystery for his family. So I thought, yes, it was a very exciting moment. I thought, wow, I kind of knew in a flash where he was going to go, what he was going to do. And I didn't know exactly what would happen as a result, but we also moved from the Blue Mountains to Queensland at that particular time. And so it was great, actually. I had the fuel was in the tank. It drove new writing sort of on the backs of envelopes and in my mobile phone and at all sorts of different places, ideas. I do tend to jot down ideas in this now instead of on paper.
And do you write every day? What's your sort of writing regime?
I have a kind of a new writing regime, like writing new work that it's put to shame by a lot of writers, because I actually have a deal with myself that I write 1 page of new work a week minimum. Now I invariably do a lot more, but the only time I haven't written a page a week in the last 12, 13 years is when somebody has died or when one of our dearly departed fur babies is gone. And but then I'll write 2 pages the next week. I don't know how I thought of it, but it really works for me. And it doesn't sound like much, but it just adds up. The consistency of that deal I have with myself has resulted in 6, 7, 8 full-length manuscripts and counting, and a couple more at the start that will never see the light of day. They needed to come out. I learned a lot about writing by doing them, but yes, it really adds up. It just doesn't seem like it should or could, but I know other writers actually will sit down and they'll dust off a couple of thousand words. I do that sometimes. In some weeks I will be able to achieve word counts in the thousands. I know other authors who are contracted to write and they've got no choice, they've got to belt it out. So it is different for everybody. But what I do, my writing regime is usually it takes place on a Friday morning when everything's done and work is done and social media stuff is done. I'll literally read what I wrote the week before. And the deal I have is that once I finish reading, I just will not get up and make a cup of tea. I will just start writing. I will keep going until the thought runs out. And then I do the same thing all again next week. And, I just don't judge the quality at that stage, except as I'm rereading, if I see errors, grammar, spelling, something that could be said better. I've done it so often now that big flag for me is, well, how does the character feel in that moment? That's something I definitely look out for. And that puts more fuel in the tank as I'm writing to actually keep going. So that's the way I've worked out for myself. Plotting does help though, but I've met authors who say no, they never do.
I know it's fascinating because everybody writes in a different way, and it's always interesting to hear what how people organize it, and that's fantastic, the idea of writing sort of one page of new work a week. That sounds good to me. I mean, the only way I ever write anything is with a big looming deadline over my head. Otherwise, I could sit on a paragraph for 3 weeks,
Yes.
So I think, if you've set yourself 1 page per week and you stick to it, I mean, you're my new god.
Oh, well, there you go. It's everyone can do it. Everyone can do it. I have a log jam of manuscripts, and Tank Water was the first one. I say log jam because I dance along the logs. I've said this a few times in these online sessions. Tank Water was the first one that got free of the log jam, and so I'm dancing on other ones now. But you can hop in between them as well. You can be on that story. So I go from the 19th century to the 1920s just with one leap.
Now, I know we want to open up for questions. So one quick thing more, so that before Jana then asks for contributions from everybody else. But your new work. That you're working on, you said you've got a whole lot of them, but just you're working on something about a female cave explorer back in the 19th century. It sounds fantastic, but still in a rural setting.
Yes, a rural setting. Yes, Australia's great cave system, Jenolan Caves, has inspired writers since Indigenous inhabitation for tens of thousands of years. Right through to now the stories of Jenolan, reopening after floods and fire and plague, etc. I was a guide at Jenolan for 4 years, a casual guide. It was one of the best day jobs I've ever had because being a theatre denizen, you take tickets at the door, you tell stories and you manipulate sound and lights and scare people and delight them, and then sometimes you get a little round of applause and tips. And then, send them on their way enthralled. And so working at Jenolan gave me access to an amazing oral history of that place. And it took me a long time to find out a way into it because it's so big. The caves are so big and the storytelling, the social history is so big. But there was always this persistent legend of Jane Falls, a female cave explorer. And so my manuscript I'm just doing the finishing touches of now is about her and what it would have taken for a young Irish immigrant to discover a cave, which she's purported to have done. And all of the layers of history had to come off to find that one. And as I said, I've been reading a lot of historical fiction and catching as many sessions as I can about historical fiction to see how other authors do it. So it's taken me to places that I never imagined. It's the research that I've done has taught us more about Jenolan than even the most experienced veteran guides that I learnt to interpret the caves from. It taught us stuff that we just didn't know. It's led me to places that have broken new ground just historically. But it's something that I'm really, really thrilled about sharing eventually. So,
well, I can't wait for one to read it. So hurry up with it.
Thank you. I will.
2 pages a week.
Okay, all right, deal.
All right, Michael, it's been a pleasure, but it's not over yet. Jana, I'll hand over to you because I do understand that amongst all these wonderful people here, we do have a Brisbane book club. So I'm guessing.
Oh yes, I need to give them a shout out. So Joanne and the WSB Book Club. Oh, there's someone waving. Hello. Thank you so much for reading. And Joanne has been giving me texts. I get these texts. I got one today. You know, in the mad busyness of selling a book and talking about books, to get these things with people telling me how much they enjoyed it and what it inspired them to think about. So thank you to the WSB Book Club, whoever you are. And Joanne, thank you.
All right, we have had quite a few questions coming in, so I'll try and get through as many as I can. We will start off with a question from Amanda. She says, congratulations, a wonderful, wonderful book. Did you deliberately pace the story to mirror the pace of life in the country? Appreciated the subtle, multi-layered plot and character development.
Yeah, great question. Yes, I did. I had to deliberately do it. I had recollections of the cyclical nature of country living on farms from, you know, when I was born to about the age of 9. And, you know, I've spent many years working in rural journalism, and I realised how much country life had changed in those years. So I was a kid in the 1970s. And so I had to do my research and make sure that when I'm talking about harvest, it's the right time of year, and frost risk and seeding, and, you know, even looked up the rain patterns of the western slopes and plains to check all that across, just because I think when you're writing about a setting that's real, even though these towns are fictitious, but it's the northern New England is a real place, writers, we've got to get it right. So yes, I did do my footwork with that one in a journalistic way. I can't help it, I suppose. Good question.
We've got a question from Rob. He says, was writing some of Tank Water triggering for you? And if so, what helped getting it on the page and taking care of yourself in the process?
The research behind the gay hate crimes was more harrowing than the writing. In actual fact, the writing was a bit cathartic. So, as I said before, the rural-based gay hate crimes are very rarely written about in what we call the mainstream media. They pop up far more regularly in academic works. There's an amazing Australian criminologist called Steve Thompson, Thomsen, and a lot of the research that he did over the last 30 years actually elucidated me about, or gave me insight into rural-based gay hate crimes, or gay hate crimes that took place in outer urban areas or in the borderland between city and country. Yes, they are very harrowing. I found myself sort of slightly disassociating reading them because I wanted to make sure that I experienced them. A lot of them, the perpetrators did get away with murder or got let off with manslaughter charges. So it's a bit galling to see that. So I had, by the time I'd done a lot of that reading, I thought, okay, I know what I want to say. I'm going to get it out on the page. So it became cathartic and I guess, in a sense, healing that initial shock. But yeah, some of them I still think about. It's because of the individuals involved and their families and friends. And a lot of gay men who were attacked survived the attacks and have lived in silence. So whenever I find myself faltering a bit, I think of them because they're in a state we need to change for them pretty quickly.
And Toby was wondering if you could tell us more about the particular reasons why gay hate seems to have been so prolific, particularly in the 80s. I imagine it's a combination of the AIDS epidemic and also small town mentality.
Yeah, that is a very good question. But there's the only way I can think to answer it is that it's strange how, and it often baffles people, how the phenomenon of gay hate crime in Australia is very much focused on the Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong region. And we don't have the same high saturation of cases in other cities and suburbs in Australia. There are cases in Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, and other cities, of course. But this saturation of cases in that the Sydney Basin is, people wonder whether it's because a lot of gay people moved there because it was deemed safer. Yeah, it's hard to get a handle on them still. There's a lot more research and a lot more writing until we can answer that question more definitively. So I hope that there's some way to answer that one.
We've got a question from Puppy. They say, was it easier or harder having friends and family read Tank Water compared to your memoir or your non-fiction?
Oh, the memoir was much harder to have friends and family read because it's real. It's my real life on the page. But I got through that because I figured if you're going to write about people who did bad stuff to you, or you perceive them to have done that, then you must actually include yourself in the list of people that did bad stuff. And so I was very honest about my account of my grief process in Questionable Deeds, because I needed to actually write about the negative stuff that other people contributed to the experience. But it's what I call, you can't paint yourself as a saint amongst sinners. You're just going to write a misery memoir, they call that, and they do get a bit boring, like poor me, poor me, poor me. Although, you know, there is a fine line. But it was much, much harder to have people read that, because I felt as though I was going to be judged, but I don't know that I necessarily ever was, at least to my face. But it was a great experience to go through. So by the time I was writing Tank Water and having that read, no, it was one step removed from me through the fictional lens, for sure.
And then Poppy also wants to know, when it comes to process, what have you learnt, mistakes or helpful things, from writing your debut that you'll use when you write your second novel?
I realized very early on that the biggest mistake a first-time novelist could make would be to not begin their second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth book before the first one came out, because the attention, you get a wonderful amount of attention as a debut novelist. It's wonderful. The Australian publishing sector is very welcoming, but to be at this point and not know what's coming next, I think I just couldn't imagine. I didn't want to. I suppose I could imagine it. I thought, oh, it'd be a really difficult situation to be in. It took a while for Tank Water to find a publisher, and I must pay tribute to Anna Solding of Midnight Sun Publishing in this session, because she took a risk on edgy subject matter where you know, it had been across the desk of a lot of publishers in Australia, and yeah, she really came as the cavalry at the last moment. So yeah, it is, as I said, it's my first novel, but it's kind of was fairly complete a while ago. There's been a lot more words under the bridge since then.
And off the back of that, Max has a question that says, can you tell us about the reshaping of the story through the relationship with your publisher and the editing process?
Yes. Look, it's such a luxury to work with a publishing team, and Anna put together a great team. And Liz also did this for me long before it got onto Midnight Sun's desk. So it was a great tribute to Liz's support of me that it got onto the publisher's desk in such great shape, and I could see the work had been done by that point. But nevertheless, there were more questions she had. I think the best thing that editors do, the best part of that reshaping process, is for the editor to ask a lot of questions of the author. And you know, there's sort of a bit of a phenomenon on Twitter where people say, oh my God, I've got 6,000 track changes on my manuscript, or I've got 3,500. I think I had almost 4,000. And you realize very quickly that these people know what they're doing. They know what makes a great story. So you sort of settle into their hands a bit. I had to put my foot down about some things that I was very adamant about, particularly towards the last third of the book. But nevertheless, I think it's wise to take every piece of an editor's advice on board, at least consider it, because they do know what they're doing. And yeah, the other thing that impacted the story and the shaping of it was actually the cover design by this fantastic South Australian-based cover designer. He's also an author. Her name is Kim Locke, and she designed the cover. She almost got it in one. I saw a selection of them, and that one stood out, and it had very little adjustment between that draft and what you see. But this is a practical example for Max. railway bridge in that, at the bottom of that cover design. There was no railway bridge at Kippen until I saw that cover, and I thought, I don't want them to change that image. It's perfect. It's the rural decrepitude of Kippen. So I added the railway bridge into the story at that time, and I had the luxury of time in order to do it. And it made, I think it made for a better story, because I love that image. So yes, that shaping of the book together, it's very frenetic. Well, I don't have anything to compare it to. That's the only time I've had that experience working with a publisher so far. But it was very frenetic. It happens very quickly. You've got to be on your toes. I imagined that I'd be, had acres of time to do it, but I was actually appearing in a play, rehearsing for months, had no time at that moment. And so it was very exciting. It took all the skill I had developed to do both to the best of my ability. And it all worked out in the end. So it goes to show you can be as prepared as you like, but then life throws curveballs at you. Thank you.
We've got a question from Susan. She says, Inga Simpson also uses rural settings. How would you compare your settings to hers, if you're familiar with her?
I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with the name, but I'm not familiar with her work. But I'm inspired to be now, because that's really lovely to have your work compared to another author.
Were there other rural works that you kind of not drew from, but modeled how they described rural settings? Were there any reference texts?
I've talked about Annie Proulx, and if you go back, if you feel like remembering that Brokeback Mountain is actually a short story. It's not a big read. It's a long short story, but it's not anywhere near to the length of a novella. Have a look at that. If any writers want to learn about efficient, evocative writing of setting, look at anything that Annie Proulx has written, particularly her short stories, because you have to be more efficient in them.
And we've got one last question from someone called Corsa M. I think that might be their last name. And they say, about your process, I love the idea of writing a page a week. Or did you say page a day? Was it a page a week?
Page a week, yeah.
Page a week. In your experience, how close to completion is that page? Is it a whole lot of waffle that you then bring down, or is it a never page?
10 years ago, yes, a lot of waffle, but the more I do it, the better I believe that I'm getting at it. So, and yes, plotting does help that. The new writing that I'm doing at the moment is a story set in the 1920s. This is the one I've fully plotted. So when you sit down and you know where you're going, even when I plotted it out, I wrote some dialogue. I spent a lot of time doing it. I was quite disciplined with that plot. And so I have a lot of raw material to draw on. So, I mean, look, I may be fooling myself. We don't know until someone else reads it. That's the biggest test, when it's just between you and yourself. You see these writing memes on social media about how you got this great idea in a dream and you woke up and you wrote it down, and then you wake up and it's just crap. So it's until a reader, I believe the readers actually do maybe more than half the job of the experience of a book. It's reading is the ultimate test of writing. Absolutely.
Wow.
Great questions. Thank you.
That's just a great little snippet to end on. This has been amazing. Dom, do you have any final comments?
No, I love that too. I think that should stand as the final comment.
Yeah, totally agree. I might, because it is a shame that we're not all together, I'm going to ask everyone to unmute yourselves, and then we could just give a round of applause if you unmute.
Oh.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thanks, Michael.
Well
Thank
done.
you, Dom. This has been such a great chat.
Hello, Di. Hi, Rob. Hello. I saw Max. Hello. Hello to everyone that I know. I can't see all your pictures. It keeps changing, but I know that you're there. I saw you at the start. Lovely to see you all. And thank you to all of those who I don't know as well. It's really, really gratifying that you came and you didn't watch Lee Sales, that you watched Dominique Schwartz and me.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
you
I'll
so
see you
much.
all out there soon.
Bye.
See you later, everyone.
Bye.